against Republican lies and to reframe the debate on our terms, on matters of justice, equality, fairness, and opportunity for all. That means translating the energy of the last 200+ days into an overwhelming force for change that cannot be stopped. And it means heading into 2018 that we'll work side by side with each of you to elect progressives up and down the ballot and to reclaim state capitals, Congress, and our country. Remember, the truth is a lion. It's indomitable. We don't have to protect it. It protects us. This is going to be a long, hard fight. We know it. But we have the truth on our side. And with it, we will stand up for our shared humanity. We will stand united for our defining and patriotic ideals, that we're all equal, that we're all full Americans, that we are all deserving of justice and dignity under our God, whoever she may be. Thank you very much.
Let's welcome undocumented dreamer and activist Pamela Chomba.
They said my name right, that's good. On May 15th, 2017 of this year at 5:58 a.m., the words alarm woke me up. Police, open up! Open up! I panicked, I was so confused. My dog kept barking and I looked at my sister and wondered what's going on. My family huddled around the door and I pushed them away when I saw ice. There were agents outside my door with guns and in SWAT gears. They were agents outside my door for Homeland Security, and they wanted to see us. It clicked. My name is Pamela Chomba. I am an undocumented Muslim Latinx woman, and I'm not safe. I wasn't safe when I showed up at my door, and I'm not safe now. After the courageous immigrant youth movement, President Obama stood in the Rose Garden on June 15th, 2012 to announce a new executive action called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It gave 800,000 dreamers the chance to come out of the shadows, pass a criminal background check, and most of all, not fear being deported. I, myself, with 2 of my siblings, only make 3 of the 800,000 dreamers that were given the chance to come out. And this program works. And immediately after receiving my work permit, I looked for a job that merited a 4-year degree because my parents worked their butts off to make sure I went to college. I got a car because I could drive. I got a driver's license. And I thought to myself every day, this is it. It's one step closer to the American dream. I told my friends I was undocumented for the first time, and I felt safe. But all of that went away when I showed up at my door. On January 25th, this room rallied together against the Muslim ban. But we didn't rally against the other executive order, the one that made 11 million undocumented immigrants a criminal, the students, the dreamers, the mothers, and the workers. Because this, even with protected status, DACA recipients have been detained. Back at my door, an officer said, "We need to show you a picture. It's about an investigation." With fear in my bones, I asked them for a warrant, which they did not have. So I told them, "I do not give you permission to enter my home." They lingered outside my door for almost an hour, but they eventually left. And I made my family hide. I've never shared this story in public. As activists, we shout, undocumented, unafraid. But I am so afraid. Standing in this room, I'm still afraid. Things started looking up. They started feeling a little bit better. But then Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton came out with 9 other states and sent a letter to the Trump administration saying that if we do not end the DACA program, we are ready to sue the government to end it ourselves. Killing DACA would make me and 800,000 dreamers, it would take us away from the workforce, take us away from this very room, and expose us to economic hardships that dash our futures. As if those stakes were not high enough, our GDP would take a loss of $433 billion over 10 years. 1 in 10 DACA recipients have purchased homes, and 50% of them have purchased vehicles. Your coworkers will start leaving these spaces. You'll see less people attending rallies. You see less people showing up at meetings, and less people in this room. You will see us leave if you do not step up and watch us and protect us. DACA and Dreamers are just one critical part in the fight to treat immigrants and immigration as one of the most positive attributes of our country. Our opponents, who seek to redefine the narrow American dream only to one of exclusion, have been waiting patiently for this moment. You saw them last night, you saw them today. They are positioned to take advantage of it, and they have a plan. Which is why you see Ken Paxton in Texas leading the charge against DACA and pushing for SB 4, a Show Me Your Papers law that begins on September 1st in Texas. Which is why you see the DHS putting the TPS program at stake, a temporary status that impacts populations from Haiti, El Salvador, and many more. Which is why you see Jeff Sessions embrace the end of DACA and deportation measures that make our communities less safe by endangering families. Why you see Senator Perdue of this state introduce the RACE Act to cut legal immigration by 50%. And why you see undocumented students in Georgia locked out of higher education because of their status. This is not an attack on just dreamers. It's an attack on all immigrants. Those here in the country and those waiting for their chance to come. It's an attack on you and your teammates, your supporters and students. It's an attack on our movement. Our opponents want to remake our immigration system in their image and redefine what immigration has always meant to America. This Tuesday, August 15th, dreamers and activists across the country will rally to defend DACA. We need you to stand with us. I need you to show up on August 15th and fight for me and for dreams, because we're all ready to feel that moment 5 years ago when on August 15th, 800,000 dreamers came out of the shadows and applied for DACA. We are one step closer to American dream, and you need to stand with us to defend that. So take out your phones. Take out your phones. DefendDACA.com or text the number on the screen. Show up at a rally in a city near you, and if there isn't one, organize one. And because this is an intergenerational movement that affects our families and our friends, I'd like to invite Dolores Huerta to the stage. She's coming, don't worry. When our friends are under attack, what do we do? When dreamers are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
here to stay. Show up. We're here to stay. Thank you so much, Dolores. Thank you. No. And I'll take my photo.
Dolores is an icon.
She's a civil rights hero.
She's the first general that I followed into war.
She's not afraid to speak truth to power.
Dolores Huerta, who is an old friend of mine.
The FBI knew how dangerous Dolores was. Dolores came up with the slogan, Si se puede.
Yes, we can.
You were a young girl growing up in America in the 40s. You must have had a dream.
After I had seen the miserable conditions of farm workers, Cesar Chavez said, we have to organize a union. You had this ambience all around you that you could really change the world.
It was beyond question the largest gathering on behalf of farm workers in California history.
I wish they'd all go back to where they came from. We have no labor troubles.
She wasn't asking for permission. She just did what needed to be done.
She has such a firm belief in what she's doing.
We've never given up.
That she infects you with it.
Dolores Huerta. 90,000 people were poisoned in the fields of the United States of America.
The farm workers founded the whole idea of environmental justice.
Men were threatened by her power.
She's a very volatile individual.
She's an insult.
People wanted to see her in a more traditional role.
I left a couple of my children behind.
That's part of the sacrifice that we made and that we had to make.
And it still pains me when I think about it.
People in power have no idea of the true heroes of this country.
I would not have been able to see what's hidden in the fields of our country without Dolores.
We're knee-deep in sexism when it comes to why she isn't studied and why people don't know her.
Latina girls need to see statues of you. We really got to set the record straight. I mean, women cannot be written out of history.
Down with violence! Abajo! Down with racism! Abajo! Down with sexism! Abajo!
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that you will all be able to see this movie. It's being distributed by a public broadcasting company. And if you go on the web, Dolores, the movie, there is a listing there of the places where it will be shown. And hopefully it will come to your area also. And really the movie is about my work with the Farm Workers Union, but the main thing it's about organizing, okay? Organizing. So I just want to thank you all very much for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. And I just want to say, Netroots Nation, you are a blessing to our country. Give yourself a big applause. You know, when we think of the issues that we are facing today, and I think all of us in this room, at one point or the other in our lives, we have been, encountered with these issues. We have been living them. People of color here in the room, I'm sure you, like many of me, even though I'm a fifth-generation American, my great-grandfather was in the Civil War on the Union side. But every day of my growing up, especially as a teenager, my family, myself, we were faced with racism. And when we think about, and I think in terms of the Anglo-Caucasian people in the audience, you probably also were faced with that in some way or the other, hearing about it in your families or some way it affected you. And, we have been living with these issues for so long. And I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to really confront the issues, not only in the work that we do, but also in the history. And we know that racism's history comes from the stain of slavery on our country. And that racism has been used, and has been used, and is still being used as a method, a tool of domination to really justify the fact that slaves were not paid for their work. And that working people today, are also facing this kind of bigotry, maybe because they don't go to college, that somehow they shouldn't be paid for their labor, right? And then, of course, if we kind of continue on that same thread, when it comes to women, also women, somehow women are here to serve their masters, and they shouldn't be paid, equal pay for their work that they do either. So we can see how if we kind of trace all of that domination, it comes to the history of racism in our country and the history of slavery in our country. And I think that there's two things that we have to do, I think. One of the things that we have to do is really have to concentrate on education. And I want to talk about education in a different way, not only of the things that we have to teach in terms of getting a quality education, of course, which is something that we all want, but talk about, where do we come from? I always say that one of the best ways to get rid of racism is, number one, to remember that we only have one human race, Homo sapiens, right? We only have one human race. We have a lot of different ethnic groups. We have a lot of different nationalities, but we only have one human race, and it's Homo sapiens. It's all about science, right? Homo sapiens. What does that mean? And then we think about, where did our human race begin? Our human race began in Africa. Don't we all know that? Our human race began in Africa. So when we think about that our human race began in Africa, what does that mean? That means that we, all of us here, are Africans of different shades and colors. So we can say to the KKK, to the alt-right, to those white citizens' councils, get over it, you're Africans, okay? And there is a word that comes from South Africa, and the word is Wozani. And what does that word mean? It means that we are coming together, all of us are coming together to fight for justice. And we are coming together to fight to end racism in our society. So I would like to ask you to join me in that word. Can I say 1, 2, 3? And let's all shout Wozani at the top of our lungs, okay? We are coming together to fight for justice. Let's go. 1, 2, 3. Wozani! All right. Okay. Let's keep doing that. And, when they talk about this attack on Latinos, Mexicans, I'm a proud Mexican-American, everybody, okay? And, and the immigration raids and these families that are being separated, it's not about immigration. It's not a crime to cross the border. It's a civil offense. It's a civil offense because when somebody crosses a border, they don't hurt anybody. They're not hurting anybody. They're coming here to look for work. But they make it a crime because we need to fill our jails. It's about incarceration. It's not about anybody breaking the law. And when we think about immigration, again, half of my grandparents, they were here. They were coming on the boats, and the other half of my grandparents, the indigenous people, were waiting here to welcome them to the United States of America. This was a brown country, okay, when the Europeans got here. Let's remember that. So when people say we want our country back, well, the Native Americans would like to say that too, right? We want our country back. And every 20 years since the history of this country that was formed by immigrants that came here from all over the world, we have had a legalization program. Every 20 years. Now we're about 30 years behind the time. And in the last immigration law that we passed in 1986, people only needed 3 documents. The farm workers needed 3 documents to get their immigration status. Other people needed to prove that they had been here for 5 years to get their immigration status. So again, it's not about our immigrants breaking laws. It's really about the racism and the incarceration of the people of our country. Now, I think the sad thing when we think about this is that we have been living with so many of these issues for so many years. And again, when I go back to education, what do we have to do? We have to educate people. We have to remind them and put it into our school books that the Congress and the White House were built by African slaves. How many of us know that? Because it's not in our school books. It's not in our school books, right? And that the infrastructure of this country was built by people from Mexico and people that came here from the Orient, from Asia. They're the ones that did the hard work to build this country. And our children of color need to know this, and the Anglo children need to know this too, so that they can understand this. And if we do not have this education, I think this is why we are in the pickle that we're in right now. Okay, because when we think of why would people vote for a political party that crashed our economy, that got us into this endless war that we have in the Middle East, why would people vote for them? Why would they vote for them? Besides the gerrymandering. But again, there is just a lot of ignorance in our society right now, and people don't know. They don't know who built the country. They don't know this history of the people of color that contributed to the United States of America. And the other thing, too, that is really wrong is when we do not have an educated citizenry, as the great philosopher Jose Ortega y Gasset said, if you do not have an educated citizenry, the corrupt and the criminal will govern. The corrupt and the criminal will govern. So it's incumbent upon us now, to all of us, that we all have to come together and that we have to get rid of this bigotry and this racism in our society, because as we can see, it is bringing our country down. It is destroying our country. And so sometimes, people say, everything that is happening right now, it is so bad. It is so bad. But all of us have been living this for many, many decades, you might say. But now it is very visible. The bigotry is out there, the racism out there, misogyny is out there. It's very, very visible. And sometimes I think that things have to become so ugly, and they have to be right in front of your face, because then we know that we have to do something about it. And the only way that we can really get out of the situation that we're in right now is that we really have to start organizing. And we have to organize at the local level. We have to organize at the school board level, at the city council level, and the legislative level. And the one thing, because we know that this is almost the only way that we can solve these issues. We have to do it right there at the grassroots level. That's the only way that we can take it over, because that is exactly what the opposition does. This is what they do. They organize at the local level. And we have to get our people then to take over those school boards and those city councils, and those water boards and those recreation boards. In our organization, the Dolores Huerta Foundation, this is what we do. We organize at the grassroots level. And you would be surprised at how many of our people that we organize, farm workers, construction workers, people who work as hotel maids, that they are now sitting on school boards, okay? And they are sitting on city councils. So they can actually do it. We just have to give them the tools and show them what they can do. And the other thing is that we have to realize that if we do not do it, it's not going to happen. If we do not do it, it's not going to happen. We cannot wait for somebody else to do it for us. It's really up to us completely. The other thing that we have to do when we talk about education is we have to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. Stop the school-to-prison pipeline. Because in so many parts of the United States of America right now, we have so many of our children of color, again, Latinos, African Americans, and our poor white kids also. They get affected by this. They get suspended, they get expelled from their schools, and they're not given the kind of a quality education that they deserve. And yes, we do have to have free education, and we do have to have free health care for the people in our country. And I think it is a shame that we, the richest country in the world, does not have free health care for everybody or free education. Now, if they can do this in Europe, if they can do this in Cuba, this little teeny country called Cuba that is so poor, but yet every citizen in Cuba gets a free education and they all have free health care. Okay? Why can't we in the United States? Well, I think one of the reasons that we can't is because how do we pay for it? How do we pay for this? Well, there's something else that we don't have that the other countries have. We do not own our natural resources. We do not own our natural resources. Our natural resources are owned by other oil companies and gas companies, electricity companies, transportation systems. You know, other people own them, corporations own them. And as long as we do not own the natural resources of our own country, that really should belong to the people. We will never have enough money to pay for the things that we need. And it is a sin and a disgrace that in the United States of America that we have so many empty houses and so many homeless people. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, and sometimes people get really discouraged and they think, how are we going to overcome this? How are we going to overcome these years of this terrible administration that we are now living in? And I just have to say that, you know, as an organizer, I see this as an opportunity because I think that we are finally waking up. We are finally waking up because all of the issues that we're talking about now, hey, they've been around for decades. And we just were not addressing them because people were kind of comfortable. But now we realize that, you know, the pinch is on everybody. The pinch is on everybody. Everybody's going to be hurting at one point or the other. And the thing is that if we do not take action, then things are not going to get any better. And we all have to do it collectively. You know, I really hope that the next march on Washington, that we not only have the women's marching, that we not only have the scientists marching, Black Lives Matter, and labor unions, LGBT communities. I think we all have to come together and march together, right? We all have to come and march together. And if we can do this, then I think that we will really be able to show the power that we have. But we can't do it alone, and we can't expect that anybody else is going to do it for us. We are the only ones that can make it happen. Just like in that film that you saw, the trailer, the poorest people, the farm workers, taking on Richard Nixon, President Nixon, taking on Governor Ronald Reagan, you know, taking on the Farm Bureau Federation, but we won. And it was the poor people, the poorest people of all, because they all came together. We cannot do it alone. We all have to make it all together. So, and I think we cannot despair. You know, let's not get hopeless or cynical. And I want to quote Pablo Neruda, the Cuban poet. What did he say? He said this: they can cut all the flowers, but they can't hold back the spring. They can cut all the flowers, but they can't hold back the spring. And Netroots, yes, Netroots is the roots of justice. We, all of us sitting here together today, we are going to go out there and we are going to sow those seeds of justice in all of the work that we're doing, in all of the messaging that we're doing, because we have to become the messengers. And those seeds of justice that we are sowing, that is going to be the spring. And when this time that we're going through is over, we are not only going to be able to fix so many of these issues, you know, climate change, attacks on immigrants, attacks on women, attacks on our LGBT community, on our transgender community, the whole issue of climate change. We are not only going to be working on those issues and fixing those issues for the United States of America, we are going to be fixing those issues for the whole world. Okay, can you believe that? Do you believe that? And so I'm going to end by asking you all a question. And I know you know the answer, but I'm going to ask you the question anyway. I'm just going to ask you a really simple question. I'm going to ask you, and don't answer yet, please, until I tell you, okay? I'm going to ask you who's got the power, and I want you to say, we've got the power. And when I say what kind of power, I want you to say people power, okay? Okay, so let's do it. I'll go first, you respond, and do it as loud as you can. Who's got the power? We've got power. What kind of power? Okay, we're going to do that one more time, but I want you to shout even louder. And when I say what kind of power, you're going to say Netroots power. Who's got the power? What kind of power? So are we going to be working together, working hard, reaching out, especially to those people that don't want to listen to us? Because we have to convert them. Can we do it? What do we say? ¿Se puede o no se puede? Okay, I kind of cheated on that one, okay? So I said that in Spanish. It says, can we do it? ¿Se puede? Si se puede means yes, we can. So I want you all to please put your hands together. We're going to do an organized hand clap, and we're going to say, si se puede. Let's go. Si se puede. And now it gives me great, great pleasure to be able to introduce the Inconvenient sequel. And we're going to see a little trailer on that, and we're going to be able to see our wonderful, wonderful Vice President. But you're going to see the trailer first, okay? And I'll come back and introduce him in Mustafa Ali, okay? Trailer. Thank you. Muchas gracias. It's the pipe.
Is in the tradition of every great moral movement that has advanced the cause of humankind. And every single one of them has met with resistance to the point where many of the advocates wondered, how long is this going to take? Martin Luther King famously, when someone asked, how long is this going to take? He said, how long? Not long. Because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long. Because the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We are close in this movement to the tipping point beyond which this movement, like the abolition movement, like the women's suffrage movement, like the civil rights movement, like the anti-apartheid movement, like the movement for gay rights, is resolved into a choice between right and wrong. And because of who we are as human beings, the outcome is foreordained. And it is right to save the future for humanity. It is wrong to pollute this earth and destroy the climate balance. It is right to give hope to the future generation. It will not be easy, and we too will encounter a series of no's. But after the last no comes a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends.
It's supposed to be 70 degrees today. It's freezing here. Speaking of global warming, we need some global warming. It's freezing.
The most criticized scene in the movie An Inconvenient Truth was showing that the combination of sea level rise and storm surge would flood the 9/11 memorial site. And people said, what a terrible exaggeration.
Hurricane Sandy slammed into New York City last night, flooding the World Trade Center site.
Storms get stronger and more destructive. Watch the water splash off the city. This is global warming.
I felt so scared. Sorry.
Despair can be paralyzing, but this to me is the most exciting new development. We're seeing a tremendous amount of positive change. The basis is there, but it's still not enough.
It's crunch time at the climate change conference in Paris.
Still some really tough negotiations going on.
What would it take to shift to renewables? I'm talking about breaking the impasse. Virtually every nation in the entire world agreed to get to zero greenhouse emissions. It is unprecedented.
It's time to put America first. That includes a promise to cancel billions in climate change spending. Our plan will end the EPA.
The next generation would be justified in looking back at us and asking, what were you thinking? Couldn't you hear what the scientists were saying? Couldn't you hear what Mother Nature was screaming at you? This movement is in the tradition of every great movement that has advanced humankind.
We're not going to recognize it. We don't want to discuss it.
It is right to save humanity. It is wrong to pollute this earth. It is right to give hope to the future generation. Don't let anybody tell you that we're going to get on rocket ships and live on Mars. This is our home.
Let's welcome our great Vice President, should have been President, Al Gore.
Thank you. And
Mustafa Ali.
And Mustafa Ali.
Thank you.
Another hand for Dolores Huerta. We got some tough acts to follow, man.
We sure do. Can y'all give it up again for Reverend Durley? So it's such an honor to be here with you this evening. And I know everyone is excited about the new movie that's out, but also about making real change and embracing our power and how change can happen. And I actually took another look again at Inconvenient Truth and then the sequel. And the interesting thing is I thought about something that Dr. King shared with us many, many years ago. He said that we come to these shores on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And it was interesting because as I started to, think about the impacts that are happening, and how sometimes we silo and segregate ourselves, and how we're there now. And we're coming up on the 12th anniversary of Katrina, August the 29th, and I was there on the ground. But we also have places like Princeville, North Carolina, founded by African slaves, and just had a 100-year flood. And places like Nichols, South Carolina, same thing. Why is this movie so important at this moment in time?
Well, Mustafa, I want to join you in thanking and acknowledging all the speakers that came before, and Dolores and Gerald Durley and Tom Steyer, who gave such a wonderful address, and Pamela Chomba. And I want to thank Eric Thutt and Mary Rickles and the entire Netroots Nation team for doing a wonderful job. And thanks to all of you. So the work that you've done for so many years, Mustafa, actually embodies one way to answer the question you've just asked. Because environmental justice and climate justice is a cause that connects what we are doing to the environment and to the climate, and the prejudice and the insults to people, communities of color, people and communities of low income. Why? Because they have less means to defend themselves when people want to locate a new hazardous waste site, or when they are looking where the downwind plumes are for some terrible polluting facility. And this has been going on for a long time. But we are now seeing the growth of this same issue on a truly global basis. Today, we'll put 110 million tons of man-made global warming pollution in the sky. You talk about violence. Violence is not just a metaphor. It is that too. But this kills people. It hurts people. The cumulative amount that's up there traps as much extra heat energy every day as would be released by 400,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours on this planet. And it's a big planet, but that's an enormous amount of energy. And it is radically transforming the ecological system of the Earth. Not just raising temperatures, which, by the way, in some regions of the Earth are themselves a dire threat. There was a heat index in a city in Iran not long ago of 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius. No one can live outside for more than 5 or 6 hours, no matter how healthy. It's also disrupting the water cycle, and you're talking about these rain bombs. You know, last week both Miami and New Orleans were flooded out and paralyzed, not by the ocean, although the sea level contributed this time, but so much of the ocean's water vapor is being boiled into the sky that when it comes over the land, we get these historic downpours. 7 inches in 2 hours in Miami last week, week ago Tuesday. 9 inches in 12 hours in New Orleans. And in both cities, the pumps holding the ocean at bay failed because of the event, and both cities were paralyzed. There are many such events all over the world on a regular basis. Every night on the TV news now is like a nature hike through the book of Revelation, and the news media often does not connect the dots, but individuals are beginning to, and we must. Because here's what's at stake. The large carbon polluters feel that they have a right to use the sky as an open sewer. And they want to continue using the sky as a sewer for as long as they can get away with it. Now, it's an issue of poverty because those with low income nations and low-income communities within wealthy nations cannot defend themselves, not nearly as well, and sometimes not at all. So, just as environmental justice focuses our attention on the violence that is inflicted on those who are disadvantaged, this large pattern that is now global is inflicting violence that is unjust and must be halted. But the carbon polluters are using the same techniques that the tobacco companies used years ago. You remember when the doctors made it clear that smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer and other diseases? They hired actors and dressed them up as doctors and put them in front of cameras to falsely reassure people that there was no health problem. And 100 million people died before we finally got over those deceptions. The large carbon polluters are using the exact same playbook. They have hired many of the exact same PR agents, and they are trying to fool people to the point where it's incapable of the political system to respond. Netroots Nation embodies the awakening of a new consciousness that has to spread all across this country to demand that we do go back to a government of the people and by the people and for the people.
Yes. So let me ask a couple questions. I'm going to set the notes down here and we're going to have some real talk.
All right.
Okay. So you talked about this new awakening that's happening, and I agree with you on that. You know, we had the Women's March.
Yeah.
We've had the Science March. And we had the People's Climate March. How important are those moments that are a part of a movement in moving us forward to be able to address these issues?
Oh, it's crucial. And one of the lessons that Netroots Nation has taught is that connecting to one another on the internet is extremely important, but we have to connect to one another in person as well, because that's where the real deep ties come that can build the commitment necessary to keep going and to ultimately prevail.
Yeah. So let's take this just a step further. So we currently have an administration who does not feel that science is valuable. So I saw science all throughout both of the movies. And can you just speak a little bit about how important that is? And then also, how do we begin to translate science into everyday language so that Mrs. Ramirez or Mr. Johnson, who I often speak about, feel the connection in that space?
Well, the phrase speak truth to power embodies the essential formula that you're getting at here. The truth that the scientists have worked real hard to find out and double-checked and triple-checked and verified with their observations in the real world, the truth is still inconvenient for the carbon polluters and the politicians that they totally control lock, stock, and oil barrel. And so they want to hide the truth, distort the truth, confuse and distract people into ignoring the truth, so that what we can see with our own eyes and experience with our own senses and learn about with our reasoning capacity cannot be effectively used as a source of political power. They want money to be the be-all and end-all of political power. Our democracy was hacked by big money before Putin hacked our democracy, and we need to take it back. And let me say a word about the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I don't want to get into the agenda or the issues. I want to make a simple point about what he and those working for him proved last year. We have reached the point now with internet-based and social media-based communication and grassroots organization to where finally it is now possible to run an effective and potentially victorious campaign without accepting any money from fat cat billionaires or special interests or lobbyists, but just get it from the people, from the internet.
Yes, sir.
Now, let me say one other thing on this. I went to the Congress. I'm old. In my mind, I'm not. In my mind, I'm younger and thinner and I have dark hair. But I went to the Congress in the mid-'70s, and I watched this change. And when television became these awful 30-second commercials, all of them negative practically, I watched the behavior of elected representatives of the people change radically. And most of you all know what goes on now. The average elected representative in the Congress, House and Senate, you know what they do all day? They spend an average of 5 hours every single day begging special interests and lobbyists and fat cats for money. Now, what does that do? It's a question of human nature. Our founders were humanists. They understood human nature with crystal clarity. What that does to them, the people who are supposed to be representing us, and, you know, God bless the ones that are steadfast in spite of all that, but so many of them, what that does to them is they begin naturally to think about the impact of what they say and do, not on the people they're supposed to be serving. They begin to think more and more and more about the impact on those telephone calls the next day to the begging special interests and fat cats and lobbyists. And pretty soon, they're letting the fat cats and the lobbyists and the special interests write the legislation, say, here, introduce this. And they take it straight from their lawyers and lobbyists and say, you know, presiding officer, here's my bill. It's not their bill. The special interests have got a degree of control now that is toxic, and it is a disgrace to what American democracy is supposed to be about. And we need to take it back.
All right. Okay. So, as I was walking around over the last couple of days, some folks came up to me and they said, Mustafa, I know you're going to be blessed to be on stage with the Vice President, and I got a couple of questions that I'd like for him to answer. So the first one was, and it's a twofer, if you will.
All right.
One is around the Paris Climate Agreement.
All right.
And the other one is around the Clean Power Plan.
Okay.
And our current administration not seeing value in those spaces. Let me say it that way. So can you share with folks, one, what does it mean when we have an administration that moves away from the Paris Climate Agreement? And if the Clean Power Plan, is not kept intact, what do we do in those spaces?
Extremely important question. And I will tell you that when Donald Trump made his speech on June 1st announcing that he was going to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, I was very concerned. For one thing, that some other countries might use that as an excuse to pull out themselves. For another thing, that it might paralyze the willpower of states and cities and businesses and civil society here. But I will tell you that the very next day, in my faith tradition, it says, joy cometh in the morning.
All right, okay.
The next morning, the news came that the entire rest of the world had redoubled their commitments to the Paris Agreement, as if to say, we'll show you, Donald Trump.
Right.
And the governors of our largest states and many other governors besides, and hundreds of mayors of cities and a lot of business leaders who have made these commitments, they all doubled down and they said, we're going to meet the Paris Agreement regardless of what Donald Trump says. In his speech, you recall, he said, I was elected to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. Well, the next day, the mayor of Pittsburgh said, well, I'm the mayor of Pittsburgh, and we're still in the Paris Agreement.
He did.
And we're going 100% renewable.
Yes.
So, two more points.
Sure.
It now looks as if the United States of America is very likely to meet the commitments made by former President Obama under the Paris Agreement, regardless of what Trump does. One other detail. A lot of people don't know this. The way the Paris Agreement was written, and this is not entirely a coincidence, the first date upon which it is legally possible for the U.S. to be withdrawn happens to be the day after the next presidential election in 2020. And if we have a new president, excuse me a minute, a new president can simply give 30 days notice and we're back in. So it could be just a speed bump.
Yes.
Now, you asked about the Clean Power Plan. That's a little more complicated, and I don't want you to give anyone the impression that Trump's not capable of doing a lot of damage. He is. He's working overtime because he's surrounded himself with this rogues gallery of climate deniers beholden to the large carbon polluters, and we all know that. And they're secretly working to try to change everything they can and fire the scientists and get rid of any regulations they can. But the good news is that this train has left the station, and what I mean by that is the cost of electricity from solar and wind is coming down so fast, and now it's got its own momentum, and the more of them they build, the more the cost comes down. Electric cars are now becoming way more affordable. Batteries are coming down, LEDs, hundreds of efficiency technologies. The world is now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution that has the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution, but the speed of the digital revolution. I truly believe it is unstoppable. And this movie, by the way, tells the story, in part of it, of Georgetown, Texas, which is described by their mayor as the most conservative Republican city in the most conservative Republican county in Texas, and he is a Trump supporter. Well, he was and may still be. I don't know. I didn't get into that with him, but he happens to be a certified public accountant, and he knows arithmetic really well. And he did the calculation and decided to completely convert that city to 100% solar and wind electricity. And now their bills for electricity have come down. The air is cleaner. And it's kind of a side benefit that they're helping to save the future of humanity.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we heard Reverend Durley earlier speak a little bit about morality. Do you feel that the climate issue is a moral issue as well?
Absolutely. At its heart, it never should have been a political issue or an ideological issue. It is a moral issue. It is a spiritual issue. Of course it is. And on the other side of doing what's right is greed. Greed and the manipulation of facts to conceal the truth in order to distort what our democracy ought to be deciding in order to serve the interests of these special interests. So, of course, and not long from now, the next generation will ask one of two questions, depending on the decisions we make in this time period. If they have tropical diseases spreading northward and in the southern hemisphere southward into where the big populations are, if there is chaos and civil unrest because governments can't govern themselves in these conditions, if there are stronger floods and deeper droughts and more powerful storms and the melting ice and sea level, all of that stuff, what would they think about what we did to leave them with that? That's a moral question, and we would see it if we had a time machine and could go into the future and be with them when they're just asking, what in the world? Why? As I said on the screen, couldn't you hear what Mother Nature was screaming at you, much less what the scientists had found out? But there is another alternative. If they find themselves in a world with a full sense of renewal, with tens of millions of new jobs in sustainability. Solar jobs in the United States today are growing 17 times faster than all other jobs in the economy. The single fastest growing job is wind turbine technician. If we made a decision to put people to work in every community, retrofitting buildings, residential, commercial, and industrial, to get that 25% that's just completely due to wasteful construction and design, those jobs can't be outsourced or sent to some other country. We need to get our economy going in a healthy way and provide good jobs. And if the next generation lives in a world where that's going on, and the climate is once again healing, and they have hope in their hearts, and they can look at their kids and feel genuinely their lives are going to be better. I want them to look back at us in this time and ask a different question. How did you find the moral courage and resolve to stand up and do what many said was impossible? And part of the answer to that question will be that Netroots Nation helped to lead the way all across the United States, and we provided leadership and got it done.
Yes. So I want to talk a little bit about the climate movement itself now. And, you know, what you just talked about was so important. So I think it's important that we begin to break down silos, that we begin to expand the base if we're going to win on climate. So, you know, I come from Appalachia. People find it hard to believe.
You grew up in West Virginia.
I surely did. Yes, I did. Oh, some folks from West Virginia in the house. All
West
right.
by God, Virginia.
Yes. How do we connect with folks who are in Appalachia, maybe who have been working in the coal mines or other fossil fuel industries? How do we connect with folks who are in the Rust Belt or in the, you know, in the breadbasket of our country? How do we connect with them?
Yeah, well, by providing jobs, for one thing, and by telling the truth about what has happened to them, because the job loss in the coal industry came mainly because the coal companies mechanized heavily and replaced labor with these machines that slice off the tops of the mountains and despoil the beautiful landscapes, and you've seen it in your native West Virginia. And then the fracking gas came along, artificially cheap, and kind of finished off most of what remained of that industry. And then the people that own the coal companies turned around and said, well, it was the environmentalists' fault. No, it was not. But then we have to go well beyond telling the truth about what happened and tell the truth and follow up with an organized plan to get them the better jobs that they deserve with the training and the opportunities. Look, we have a lot of work to do. And you know very well this becomes kind of a cultural and political tribal type issue where people use the same phrases, and if you don't use that phrase, you're in the other camp. We've got to break that down. The good news is that it is beginning to break down. And we're seeing, but we have got to be determined about creating these new job opportunities. These coal miners that have lost their jobs, what do you feel about them? I know what most of you do and what we must feel. They and their families in previous generations really did help to build this country. They didn't have any intention to create the climate crisis. They were fulfilling good jobs for good wages, and it's not their fault that they have now been left in this situation that they're in. We all have to work together through the instruments of self-government to create the new opportunities.
Right. So I also want to talk about, because we're going to talk about expanding the base, I want to go back in time just a little bit. And I don't know if everyone knows this, but how instrumental you were in relationship with other sort of stakeholder leaders in creating Executive Order 12898, which is known as the Environmental Justice Executive Order. And I'm curious if you could share with folks why you invested that capital in that space, because it's directly tied to the climate movement right now, and why vulnerable communities needed to be a part of the mix, if you will.
I'm proud of the role that I played, and well before that executive order, I sought out Congressman John Lewis from here in Atlanta, one of the great heroes that's ever lived in this country. And John Lewis in the House and myself in the Senate, we introduced the first environmental justice bill that was ever introduced. And actually that was in the first half of 1992. I had no thought at all that maybe, what happened later that year, me joining the ticket and becoming vice president, would happen. But then 1 year later, when Bill Clinton and I went into the White House, I convinced him, which was pretty easy to do, to set up this task force. And then that led to that environmental justice executive order. And you were already in EPA, and you were the one that put it into effect and started doing the work. But Mustafa's been at this a long time. But let me make one other point. The idea for it didn't just spring out of, spontaneously. It came from the grassroots.
That's right.
And as far back as 1982, in a rural community in North Carolina, a community of poverty and color, woke up to the news that the powers that be had decided to bring truckload after truckload of hazardous chemical waste and dump it right in their community. Well, why their community? Because they did not have the connections. They didn't have the wealth. They didn't have the political influence. But for the first time in American history, they went out and laid their bodies down on the road to block those trucks from bringing that waste there. And that event kind of ignited a new awareness of this environmental justice cause. And the knowledge of it spread around the country. I started hearing about it. John Lewis started hearing about it. So it really did come from the grassroots.
Yeah. And that is a moment in time that sort of translates into where we are now. So when I'm talking about expanding the base in the climate movement, we know that there's still a lack of diversity in the leadership in many of our organizations that are focused in that space. And that if we're going to win, then that means that we have to be inclusive.
Absolutely.
And we have to make sure those ideas and innovation are in that space. Can you talk a little bit about the need in that space, and also talk a little bit about the Climate Reality Project and the trainings that you've been doing, and how you're addressing that issue?
Yeah, the Climate Reality Project holds regular training programs over a 3-day period to give people from the grassroots the skills and training they need to effectively persuade their elected officials, and many of the ones that go through the training go on to do other things too, starting renewable energy businesses, becoming, elected officials. The woman who ran the Paris conference, Christiana Figueres, was a graduate of this training program back in 2007. And it's to build a cadre of activists at the grassroots level. I'll tell you a quick story about one. Next training, by the way, is in Pittsburgh this fall. And if anybody wants to consider being a part of that, thank you. All right, climatereality.org. You can get your name on the list. But we had a training in the Seattle area, Bellevue, Washington, just a short time ago, and before that, Denver. So I want to tell you a quick story. At the Denver training, an 11-year-old girl showed up to be trained. And I said to my staff, now, what's our policy here? Are we sure that this girl is old enough to do this? It's sort of like somebody running an amusement park with a bar. You've got to be taller than this bar before you go on the ride. Yeah. But I saw her over 3 days making careful notes. And 2 weeks later, after the training was over, I clicked on a video that was going viral on social media. And here is this same 11-year-old girl who has gone to a town hall meeting of her Republican congressman in Colorado Springs, and she's got her iPad and the microphone, and she's just giving him hell on the phone. But I don't want to skip by the first part of your question because it's extremely important. Yeah. We have to have more diversity in the climate organizations. Right. We have to reach out to all communities. I want to tell you about one of our board members who's made a tremendous difference for us. Her name is Catherine Flowers, and she's from Lowndes County, Alabama. Yeah, Lowndes County. You know her, and she is amazing. And my oldest daughter, Corinna Gore, who you know well, introduced me to Catherine. I said, she's got to be African American in a very low-income rural county between Selma and Montgomery, and she was a veteran of the Air Force, and she is a powerful advocate, organizer, woman. But I and the others at Climate Reality have learned so much from her perspective and from her passion and from the experiences that she, this sounds kind of trite, but it's an example really of the tremendous benefits that the environmental movement writ large needs to take advantage of by reaching out to communities of color and every single demographic group in this country so that the environmental movement looks like America.
Yes. We can clap for that. Real talk. So I'm going to take us in a little different direction right now. So, the civil rights movement was a transformational moment, and music played a huge role in that as well. Some folks don't actually pay as much attention to that. So someone asked me the question when I was coming down the escalator to ask you, so when you were growing up, who were those musicians that were instrumental? What was the music that you was listening to?
Now, this was in the pre-hip-hop era.
This is pre-hip-hop. It is. Okay,
so you got to cut me some slack when
I answer. I am. I'm going to take you there, but okay.
Well, I will tell you, I'll give you, it's very easy for me to answer that question. There were a lot of songs, but I remember when I was, I don't know, maybe 12 years old, 13 years old, growing up in the summers in the South, when the civil rights movement was gaining momentum. I will tell you that when Bob Dylan sang Blowing in the Wind, and those words really pierced right into my heart. Everybody's so familiar with them now, but when that first started being played on the radio, I had never heard anything like that, really. And then I started hearing more songs that had that element of conscience and truth-telling, and it made a tremendous difference. And I remember during those days, I remember a moment when one of my friends in this rural community made kind of a quasi-racist comment, and one of my other friends said, "Hey, shut up, man, we don't talk that way anymore." And there were, I'm pretty sure, millions of conversations that were a little bit like that. And so one of the things that's really important is to use your voice. I mean, organizing, using your vote, influencing the political leaders, that's absolutely crucial. But using your voice and being unafraid to speak up and win the conversations on climate. I'll give you another example. The gay rights movement. If somebody had told me even 5 years ago that in the year 2017, gay marriage would be legal in all 50 states and that 2/3 of the American people would accept, honor, and celebrate gay marriage, I would have said, I sure hope so, but you're pretty naive. That's unrealistic. Now, why did it happen? It happened, first of all, because the Human Rights Campaign did a hell of a job and a lot of grassroots organizers. But it also happened because, once again, millions of conversations were won. It happened also because as that gained, as the truth of what was right gained momentum, lots and lots of gay and lesbian Americans decided and found the courage to represent themselves as to who they really are, and their friends and coworkers and family members said, oh, okay. And then it wasn't far from there to the emotion, well, if God made people this way and that way, God could not have intended this person or that person to be persecuted for his or her whole lifetime. What the hell difference does it make who you fall in love with? Let's just get on with this. We're all Americans. And that has been a healing. A healing. Now, the climate movement is right at that point. We are right at that tipping point. And I don't want to repeat myself, but what the gay rights movement, civil rights, all these other movements have in common is that it can seem as if the resistance can't be overcome. Nelson Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela said during the anti-apartheid movement, he said, it's always impossible until it's done.
Right.
And it seems impossible to some people now. It's not. We just need to get it done. We're very, very close.
Yeah, so you're saying people have power.
People have power, and the truth is a source of power.
Yes.
Not to get into the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, but he had a word I won't try to pronounce that they say translates into truth force.
Yes.
And we have all seen in our own lives how we have the ability to feel what's more likely to be true than not. And when you really feel it deeply and sink into it and without fear represent it, it has a force that changes things and can move mountains, really.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you raised, truth and power. I think they're important. Yesterday was the 44th anniversary of hip-hop. It's been around for a while now.
Yeah.
And the beauty in that space is talking about culture. It's talking about sharing the stories and realities that everyone is dealing with. Individuals like Jay-Z and Beyonce, but also individuals like Taboo of the Black Eyed Peas, who actually has a video out right now.
At Standing Rock.
Stand up for Standing Rock. Is everybody with that? Yes. And don't forget to go out and vote for that video also at MTV. I appreciate that. But you have individuals like Chance the Rapper also. Vic Mensa, Antonique Smith. As we're talking about expanding the movement, how much does culture play a role in making sure that people are, one, respected, and two, feel included in the process?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial, and of course, music in particular has an ability, as we all know, to move hearts and minds in ways that words alone cannot. We all know that, and maybe that's why you started down this road and asked about the civil rights movement. And let me mention the original song in this new movie, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. Ryan Tedder of One Direction and T-Bone Burnett, who's my neighbor and buddy in Nashville, co-wrote a song called Truth to Power, which really embodies that Gandhi-type deal. And the hook is, I've seen truth turn to power. And it's trending now. It won't be in the same awards category as Taboo, so it's okay to promote them both.
That's right. That's right. We'll try and give them both an award. How's that? So, you know, I know we're short on time, but there were a couple of other questions that folks asked me to ask you. And one of them is the general question that we have to be able to answer. It. How do we win on climate?
Well, first of all, we have a big ally, and that's Mother Nature. These climate-related extreme weather events really and truly, unfortunately, are a lot more common and a lot more destructive. And there is a lot of evidence now that people who might put themselves culturally on the other side of the political divide on climate may not feel comfortable using the phrase global warming or climate crisis, are finding their own language to express what their senses are telling them. It started big time with all the professions that work outdoors all the time, farmers, ranchers, fishermen. But now it's spreading more widely than that. But in winning these conversations, that's a big part of it, because the resistance, you know, sometimes there are people that just fly into a rage if they hear the phrase global warming. It's almost like a dysfunctional family with an alcoholic father who flies into a rage if somebody mentions the word alcohol. So the rest of the family just kind of tiptoes around without ever talking about the elephant in the room. And I think sometimes the news media worries that they're going to lose 7 to 14% of their viewers changing the channel if they even talk about global warming. And by the way, it's an embarrassment to our country that we just went through the third quadrennial presidential election cycle in a row without one single question about climate being asked in any of the debates. That is a disgrace. But we all can help change that and insist that the conversation take place and that we win that conversation. This movie, the reason why I want to encourage as many people as possible to see this movie, it opens this weekend all over the country. 100% of the profits go to train more climate activists, and there's a book of the same title on the New York Times bestseller list now this week. 100% of those profits go to train more climate activists. But the more people who go to see this, the more chance we have to build a stronger, more effective climate movement. And I'm proud that we're working with not only the Climate Reality Project, but 350.org and NRDC and EDF and Climate Hawks and a bunch of other groups who are organizing around the theaters where this movie is being shown in many cities, not every city, but in many cities. So learn about it, use your voice, use your vote, go to the town hall meetings, call and knock on the door of your congressional representative and government officials at every level. You all know how to do this. As Netroots Nation, you know how. Oh, we're working with the Indivisible group also. They're big time organizing. And this week, Indivisible has targeted 14 cities specifically, big cities where the movie is opening, and they're at every showing in all of these 14 cities. I love the Indivisible movement, by the way. And I will tell you that there's a two-part message that really works with elected officials. Maybe you already know this. But part one, you tell them how important the climate issue is to you, and tell them that if they're going to do the right thing, you'll support them. Part two, but in order to make part two work, you got to first of all decide deep down that you mean this. But part two is to tell them that if they vote with the polluters instead of with the people, just look them in the eye and say, I promise you that I am going to do everything in my power to contact as many people in your district as I can possibly contact, and I'm going to beat you and kick you out of office in this next election.
Yes. Yeah. So when the movement is successful, because I don't believe there's any other alternative.
We've got to do it.
What will our country look like? What will the planet look like for our grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren?
I have to start with a really candid expression that regrettably some damage has been done that cannot be rolled back.
Right.
Some sections of Antarctica and Greenland have now crossed a point where they will continue melting no matter what. Some temperature increases